Wonder Bread, Harley Davidson's, Demi Lovato, Bethesda's corporate image. A lot of things in this world don't age very well. Ever since Bethesda fell into a rolling faceplant and their damage control team started needing its own damage control team, the at one time positive public perception of their game quality and even the nostalgia around their older titles has been fading for a lot of people. And this isn't a video about defending Fallout 3 or Bethesda's game design or writing quality or anything, because I would tend to agree that the former is pretty shallow and the latter is usually downright bad. This is instead an examination and a sort of celebration of how, against all odds, the Fallout 3 developers took their formula and, by adding something as sensitive and easy to fuck up as Lovecraftian horror, managed to create an experience that really stands out as both a piece of interactive storytelling and a horror experience. So let's put our character together and head out to the swamps for a closer look. Oh man, choosing genders, wearing masks. I wonder if there's some kind of timely joke to be made here.
Really want to keep it that way, okay?
And here we are at the boat. Perfect. Oh, what's that? What's with the suspiciously good gear, suspiciously high amount of ammunition? I know this really good spots. I saw it in the IGN guide. Yeah, don't worry about it. Anyway, let's catch a ride. Crafting a setting that's super cool and interesting in theory isn't really the hard part. The hard part is presenting the right aspects of it to the audience and doing so at a proper pace to maintain their interest. So the golden rule of world building is, give or take a word or two, nobody really gives a shit about the minor aspects of what makes your fictional world unique. This rule often gets neglected in science fiction works in particular. It happens because writers are, understandably, pretty invested in the world they've created and they want to be thorough in their presentation of it. But they forget that the rest of us aren't looking quite as deep. We don't need to know how the made-up microchips worked in the made-up brains of made-up people, or which made-up virus corrupted the made-up AI and caused it to take over the made-up world, unless it is directly and consistently relevant to the story taking place and the characters within it. What's a good example? You guys remember Frankenstein? Good book. And it's a good book because it sticks to the point. Old Mary was one step ahead of everyone who might ask, but how does gluing corpse bits together and electrifying them do fucking anything? And she had the perfect response. Hey, don't fucking worry about it. The protagonist isn't going to tell you for his own deep personal reasons or whatever. And this is the smart thing to do in most cases because fumbling through an explanation for an imaginary phenomena would A, sound a little retarded, and B, be detrimental to the audience's focus on the story and themes that actually matter. So anyway, back to Fallout. The central character stories of Point Lookout are almost completely removed from the story of the environment itself, and I would say that's atmospherically ideal. So you want to know why the land looks like it does and the swamp water is doing this floating poisonous bubble bullshit? Alright, cool. That information and other little bits of insight like it aren't made a focal point. You can find that holotape at the bottom of an irradiated hole in the middle of fuck nowhere. Go dig it out if you want. Point Lookout does a great job of giving you enough information up front to keep you invested and curious, but not so much that that feeling of mystery ever erodes, even after you've scoured every inch of the island. Outside of finding out that Nadine is alive and learning the motivation of the tribals who attacked that asshole you don't even know, the main questline answers essentially none of the big questions that you'll have about this place. We'll go a bit more into the quests later, but for now, I'll leave you with the thought that this is all a great thing, and it really opens the door for the creative team to let the environment and set pieces speak for themselves. I hate to be a dead horse beater, but I'll quickly restate the obvious. Bethesda aren't exactly known for their prowess as well-rounded and thoughtful storytellers, at least not in a straightforward sense. Where they do thrive is in immersion through exploration, and I'll be fucked if the exploration here isn't some of the best that modern Fallout has to offer. Look at this little experience here. That's a baby carriage with a doll in it, rigged to explode if you get too close. It's in a part of the complex that you walk right into from the starting dock. They wanted every player to find this. So you flee from that, watch it explode, and then you say, oh, well that's irregular, and then you walk in the door. What the base game teaches me to expect, 9 times out of 10, when I see an odd set piece, is an NPC shortly thereafter to exposition dump on me, explain what the point was, and then, ask me to run an errand or something. But instead, you walk into the room and there's no one, just a cavalcade of identical carriages. About 3/4 of them are your standard creepy dollmobiles, but a few of them are bombs too. Once you get the room sorted out and avoid dying, you'll look around and loot, and there's no further explanation. This isn't here for a good reason. Doll carriages explode, and doll effigies litter the swamp, and you get bullied by old men with shotguns, because Point Lookout is a mad, bad place. That's not to imply that the DLC is just an assortment of crazy random events with a spooky swamp filter laid over them, or that would be a remotely good thing. But just as much as the twisted trees and poisonous swamps and unending fog are facets of Point Lookout's identity, so are places like these. Horror media can be defined most basically as a vessel for causing fear. Fear is an emotion spurred by the belief that someone or something is malicious and dangerous. And these are definitions that we already know. But we also know that not every game in which a direct threat is presented to the player is a horror game. Fallout 3 itself is not a horror game. Even on higher difficulties, the game quickly devolves into an apocalypse-themed hunting adventure. So how does Point Lookout, having the exact same gameplay loop and mechanics of the base game, pull off horror so well? Let's start with the most iconic group of enemies on offer. The swamp folk are pretty fantastically designed. As far as media depictions of mutated hillbilly cannibals go, and that list is longer than a lot of people might think, I think the swamp folk stand genuinely toward the top. Maybe they don't seem too special at a first glance. They're just mutated humanoid enemies like a few dozen other Fallout combatants, but they straddle that line between human and monster right in the sweet spot that our brain finds creepy. I mean, they're clearly human. They talk, they engage in free markets with completely sane people, they have religion, more on that later, and they sing and dance around campfires for Christ's sake. But the deranged haulers, their malformations, the inhuman resilience against physical damage, twice that of a super mutant and more, even the way they run. Look at this guy. This run pulled out of context just looks kinda goofy. But when you're alone in the dark with your headphones on, trekking the swamps, you hear that hillbilly cackle and you turn to see this shit, your asshole's gonna pucker for a moment. They're creepy by the same principle that makes images like Momo and Jeff the Killer creepy. They're clearly something resembling a normal human like us, and yet something is distinctly wrong. Our eyes are uncomfortable with it and our brains don't want to consider the implications. The roster of physical enemies admittedly gets a bit less impressive from there. The tribals are initially displayed as these highly aggressive and well-stocked bunch, but that doesn't really set them apart from any other band of human enemies, and they're eventually played for a complete joke. The story's main antagonists are distinctly non-frightening, and every other enemy is brought over from the base game. I've got one that might come across as a touch abstract, however. The fog. We've all heard the bit about that fear of the unknown being the biggest dicked fear out there and yada yada, but it rings true. Think about the start of the base game. Right as you exit the vault, they immediately shepherd you to an overlook where you get a clear and unimpeded view of the wastes. It's the game telling you, this is yours to take. Now think about pulling into Point Lookout. You're down at sea level looking up at a desolate landmass shrouded in fog, unknown entities watching from the hills. This place is not for your conquest. And that feeling of the land itself being against you never really subsides. Shapes move far out in the fog and sounds are heard all around you, but you never get a view quite as good as you'd like until danger is already right upon you. Fallout 3 being the type of game that it is, it makes sense that the developers wouldn't lean too heavily into the disempowerment that marks many of gaming's most potent horror experiences. The challenge was molding effective horror into this action roleplay framework over an extended period of time, while making sure to get in a bit of that Fallout quirk. The primary questline almost seems set on undercutting the horror at various points. Right, so there's a spooky mansion on the hill. It could house any manner of dark, horrific secret. But then there's just some old dog breeder who wants to give you a bunch of free shit and have you go commando on the locals. You hear that the tribals worship some kind of ghost, and you get the idea that there are some occult shenanigans happening here. But then it turns out that they're morons who just worship some hologram dildo. You take a trek through a grim and dangerous bog, have these nightmarish visions while you're being possessed by Mother Nature herself. Then you find out that you were in a drug-addled fever dream while a drunken sailor performed amateur brain surgery on you. It's structured in a way that wants to subvert your expectations about the grim setting and suggest that it's all just smoke and mirrors, which could have derailed the tension of the entire experience if the other quests hadn't stayed right on the money. The Dark Heart of Blackwell is a personal favorite. An old man tells you to recover a stolen book. He claims it's just a family heirloom, but that the locals seem to worship it or something. Outside, you run into a missionary, and she tells you the Blackwell is indeed up to some nefariousness, and that you should bring the book to her instead, so that she can destroy it. You find the location where the swamp folk are storing the book, and sure as shit, it's part of their weird eldritch rituals. You can actually hear the otherworldly hums of some kind of higher being within the location. When you fight through the swarm of swamp folk that want to keep you from stealing the book back and get back out to the missionary, if you so choose, you'll find that she's been murdered for her role in the book's theft, and she left a holotape begging you to take the book to the Dunwich building back in the capital. When you return it to Blackwell, he'll give you your pay and say his thanks, and then immediately venture into his basement to recite a ritual in front of an altar with a dead swamp guy on it. You get no straightforward answers about the nature of the Krivbekna throughout the rest of the DLC. Again, you're not quite sure where that leaves you. The confidence that you might have gotten from the Scooby-Doo style turnouts of the main quest are immediately undermined, and you return to having no trust in this place. From there, the Chinese spy quest, Moonshiner quest, and the soil study type quest, they give you a nice bit of insight into different aspects of the history and culture of the island, shepherding you around to different scenic locations. They're less about providing any actual big answers to the inquisitive vault dweller, however, and more about giving you enough little snippets of info to get the imagination going. It's sort of like that vague and cryptic delivery you get in From Software stories, if you'll excuse such a brash comparison. So in closing, I just want to touch on the effects of our nostalgia and how we critiqued these abstract concepts like the quality of horror. Point Lookout was still relatively new the first time I played it, and I was probably like 10 or 11. And it probably goes without saying that the heebie-jeebies of the place had a stronger impact on me then than they would have if I were playing the DLC for the first time in my 20s. It can be hard to really measure the extent to which our past positive experiences affect our ability to judge things accurately in the present. From, romantic ordeals to that really shit movie that we can't help but love because we bonded with our father over it or whatever. Nostalgia is just a big cloud we all have to live in. Another thing that can make critique challenging is just numbness, I guess. I've loved horror games since my fucking hands were big enough to hold a controller, and so the volume of horror media I've absorbed means that it's been a very long time since anything had me genuinely frightened, even after the screen was off. So with these thoughts in mind, we try to take a more zoomed out look and look at the different facets of an experience in purely objective terms. The aesthetics, the pacing, delivery, sound design, themes. And I think this is the right way to do it, but it's still such subjective territory that it often feels too simplistic. So with that in mind, I would say the Point Lookout absolutely nailed what it was going for with the limitations it had, but I can absolutely see how a person less concerned with these broken down specifics of everything, just judging the experience purely based on the effects of the horror on them, might think it totally failed. Anyway, that's about all I wanted to say. I had a ton of fun going back and playing this, putting this video together. If you guys have anything specific you'd like me to take a look at, I am more than open to input and suggestions. If you want to throw me a like, that'd be pretty sweet too. And subscribe if you're not one of the 6 beautiful, beautiful people that already have. I know it kind of seems like this channel is going nowhere, but if you subscribe, and it does, I mean, you pretty much have bragging rights. Fuck, that's dumb. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys later.